To the war in Ukraine now, and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has paid a visit to frontline troops just days before the war enters a 10th month. Zelenskyy praised Ukraine's defenders as superhuman. It's unknown exactly how many have fallen, but U.S. and British military sources estimate casualties on both sides at around 100,000.
We thank those who are no longer with us, and we will honor the memory of all fallen heroes with a moment of silence. Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the front line in Bakhmut. The president visited the embattled city to boost the morale of Ukrainian troops. A very dangerous trip with the Russians nearby, and a now familiar sight, medals for soldiers who swear their allegiance to their fatherland. Bakhmut lies in the Donetsk region, which the Russians annexed earlier this year. Since then, Putin's army has repeatedly tried and failed to take the city. His soldiers have left a trail of destruction in their wake. The Russian president was also busy, but nowhere near the front line. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin hailed the heads of the 4 illegally annexed Ukrainian regions. But he also admitted that things were not going according to plan. I would particularly like to highlight the security agencies that have begun to operate in the new Russian regions. It is difficult for you, though. The situation in Donetsk and Luhansk, in Kherson and Zaporizhia is extremely challenging. Concerns are now mounting that Putin could have his eyes on expanding the war beyond Ukraine to neighboring Moldova. Moldova's head of intelligence said Russia could launch an attack sometime early in the new year. Russian troops already illegally occupy parts of Moldova, the region known as Transnistria. Putin's war has now lasted 300 days, and another sobering number from the UN. It says it's recorded more than 700 strikes on Ukraine's healthcare facilities since February.
Let's bring in Catherine Lawler. She's a senior analyst at the Institute for the Study of War. Welcome back to the day. First of all, President Zelensky's visit to Bakhmut today. Do we have any indication of the size of that battle and why Russian troops are so intent on taking it?
Thanks. So I think it's very difficult in the open source to judge the number of forces, but what we do know is that both Russia and Ukraine have committed a sizable chunk of their offensive forces to the Bakhmut area. Ukraine is obviously defending its territory, but from the Russian perspective, there's a few reasons why they're so focused on Bakhmut. Both are political, I would say. The first is that Russian President Putin is unwilling to have Russian forces not on the offensive, at least somewhere along the front line, and he's likely ordered his commanders to capture all of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. So maintaining the offensive in Bakhmut is necessary for political and propaganda purposes from Putin's perspective. The other reason is that most of the forces around Bakhmut are members of the Wagner private military company, and the leader of that company, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has his own political aspirations and is using Bakhmut as an example of Wagner forces being the most effective or the only ones actually on the offensive compared to other Russian forces.
Let's look at the bigger picture. Today is the 300th day since the invasion. Where does the war stand?
The war is slowing slightly. We're 10 months in, and we're in the midst of brutal winter weather and mud. Russian forces have failed to achieve any of their territorial objectives. They don't fully control any Ukrainian oblasts that they didn't already hold before February 24th. And things are slowing down because of the mud and the cold, but that deadlock may not last if we see the ground freeze solid in the next several months.
The head of the Ukrainian armed forces says there's a threat of a large-scale Russian counteroffensive as early as January. How likely do you think that is?
I mean, Russian capabilities are so degraded at this point that even if they did attempt another large-scale offensive, it is almost certain to be unsuccessful, but it still does pose a threat to Ukrainian forces, in part because such an offensive requires defending against, and Ukrainian forces could find themselves pinned in parts of the front lines that they don't wish to be fighting in order to prevent that offensive. So it could limit Ukrainian abilities to conduct their own counteroffensives this winter.
There is an appearance of stalemate on the front lines. You already talked about it, but that doesn't seem to be stopping Russia attacking Ukraine with drones and missiles, especially the infrastructure. What is it going to take to end those attacks?
Honestly, I think it will take Ukraine taking back the rest of its territory. Russian leadership seems to be viewing this war increasingly as a war of will and resolve, and Ukraine will continue its resolve to continue the fight, of course, but I think those attacks are intended to weaken Ukrainian public support for continuing the war, and that is failing. So they are damaging civilian infrastructure and harming civilians across Ukraine, but they are not damaging Ukraine's will to continue the fight.
Yeah. You said that the frozen ground could lead to some movement again coming into this conflict. Do you think we'll see Ukraine again seizing the initiative and surprise maybe analysts like it did around Kharkiv and Kherson earlier this year?
I hope so. I don't think we're going to see offensives on the same scale as we did around Kharkiv or Kherson this year, but Ukraine has been very clear that it is dedicated to continuing to recapture all of its territory. And I think what that's going to look like into the next year is a series of successive counteroffensives. They may not take as much territory in one go as they did in Kharkiv or Kherson, but that doesn't mean that they won't continue to chip away at the Russian front lines and to work their way back to controlling all of Ukraine's sovereign territory.
How frustrating is all of this for the Kremlin?
I would hope very frustrating. The Kremlin intended this to be a 3-day war, right? They thought they were going to roll straight into Kyiv, and that would be the end of it, that Ukraine would capitulate, that the West wouldn't push back in any way. And obviously all of those assumptions have been invalidated. So now what was supposed to be a 3-day war may end up being a 3-year war or a 10-year war, depending on how Ukraine continues its fight and depending on Western military aid to Ukrainian forces.
It was supposed to be, from the Russian intentions, a 3-day war. Now it is a 300-day war. Is there any sign that we won't be, pretty much where we are right now, 300 days from now, on day 600 of the war, if we have to see that day?
A lot depends on Western military aid, I think, at this point. Russia has lost its offensive military capabilities. It's working to rebuild those, and it could rebuild some offensive capabilities in the medium term through conscription and through continued mobilization. But Ukraine has also learned and is building its own capabilities. So I think currently the trajectory we're on is one toward Ukrainian victory, but it will take time and it will take patience and it will take continued support. And I don't think we'll be in the same place 300 days from now. I think we will see additional Ukrainian progress. It's just a question of how quickly they can make that progress.
Kathleen Lawler, senior analyst at the Institute for the Study of War. Thank you so much. Always great talking to you.
Thank you.
Now, away from the fighting, people in Ukraine are getting ready to celebrate their first Christmas since the outbreak of the war. A favorite tradition is St. Nicholas Day. This year, some extra help was needed. And thanks to the National Rail Network and the UN, St. Nick managed to bring some joy to children despite the war. DW's Emmanuel Shaz reports.
He can't use his sleigh this year, so Sviety Mykolai, or Saint Nicholas, made his way to Kiev's central train station. Because no missiles are going to stop what Ukrainians call Magic Night from happening.
The children must have been obedient. Even this year, we're not carrying sticks, only happiness and a holiday. Since the sky is closed over Ukraine, we travel by train as much as we can.
Railway workers have been doing magic of their own since the beginning of the war, running trains on time, delivering goods and people to safety, even under fire.
As St. Nicholas said, air defense works well, but the sleigh still can't fly. So the railway has become the official carrier of St. Nicholas.
Tens of thousands of children will be expecting his visit, so St. Nicholas will travel with some special guests this year.
We are sisters, Melanka and Marichka.
We bring special gifts that children are waiting for. Gifts are meaningful, they need them. We bring not only gifts but also magic. We give them joy during these festive days.
UNICEF is providing over 30,000 gift bags and $100 million in cash handouts for families in need.
The daily strikes are making electric cuts, water shortages that make children to suffer. So during the holiday period, the Christmas and New Year, this is the time children dream about having a normalcy, having peace, and having something to expect from 2023.
St. Nicholas's train will visit the regions of Kharkiv, Donetsk, Mykolaiv and Kherson, bringing much-needed relief and joy, and a bit of a Christmas miracle.